What is up? What is up? What is up? Welcome to the Mitch Davis Show. I'm your host, Mitch Davis, founder of the MitchDavisShow.com, podcast host, The Mitch Davis Show. You can follow me on Twitter, MitchDavis_8. On today's podcast, going to be joined by the legendary, the magnificent Dale Brown, the former LSU basketball coach who took the Tigers to heights never seen before and really put LSU basketball on the map. Coach Dale Brown was a coach at LSU for a very long time and really, truthfully, changed the landscape of Southeastern Conference basketball for generations to come. Coach Dale Brown is just a wonderful man. It was just such an honor to sit down with him and talk about his career, talk about LSU basketball, and much, much more here on the Mitch Davis Show. Again, I'm your podcast host, founder of the MitchDavisShow.com. Mitch Davis. You can follow me on Twitter, MitchDavis_8. Before we get into the interview with the legendary Dale Brown, I want to thank our sponsors at the Cotton States Baseball League in New Albany, Mississippi, for all their continued support of the Mitch Davis Show. Going to be a really fun summer there at B&A Park there in New Albany, Mississippi. I'm going to be out there and be doing articles, podcasts, broadcasting, everything in between for the Cotton States Baseball League here in New Albany, Mississippi. Thank you so much for listening to the Mitch Davis Show. At this time, I'd like to welcome the legendary Dale Brown to the Mitch Davis Show podcast. I want to welcome the legendary former LSU Hall of Fame coach, just an all-around great guy, Coach Dale Brown to the Mitch Davis Show. It's an incredible honor. Coach Brown, how are you doing today?
Mitch, I have no complaints except one. The political system in our country has our moral compass. Otherwise, I'm very happy and pleased. And at 87, I'm glad to be here. John Wooden lived 4 months from being 100. I wasn't able to beat his record, so maybe I can tie him on the age limit.
Coach, I want to ask you, just to start this thing off about your faith, because you were a man of faith and a man that a lot of people like myself look up to. Coach, how have you done it all throughout these years, being such a compass for people to follow?
I'll try to make it as brief as possible. It's a long story. It's not a sob story, and I'm not whining about it, but 2 days before I was born, my biological father abandoned my mother and I. He never came back. He never wrote. He never gave us any money. My mother came off a farm. She had to find us a place to live. So we moved to Minot. She lived in a little farm about half an hour from Minot. Well, we could only find, she had to go on welfare. She became a maid for 50 cents an hour. We went on welfare for $42.50 a month, and the only place she could find to live was a one-room apartment above a bar and a hardware store. No bathroom, no shower, no nothing. We had to share with others. I never slept in a bed for 21 years. She had a little bed that pulled out from the wall, and I had a little sofa I could touch her head. But I watched my mother never complaining, working hard. And she taught me, one night she came home from babysitting, and she made us cocoa and cinnamon toast. And we sat down, and she said, "Son, I've got something to tell you, and I'm embarrassed to tell you this." And I thought, my mother embarrassed? She never smoked, she never drank, she never took a drug, she never dated anybody, she never talked about her husband that left us. I thought, what's my mother embarrassed about? And she said, "So I want to make sure you don't make the same mistakes I did in life." She said, "When these big shots come to pick me up to babysit their children," she said, "I'm so self-conscious they'll smell the mothballs in my clothes because we bought them all from rummage sales." She said, "And they'll also ask me, where did I go to college or what's your husband do?" So she said, "What I do, son, I go look up big words in the dictionary, and I write them on a 3x5 card and I study them. Then I take it with me in the car in case I forget." And she said, "Then I try to make an image on them by injecting these big words to them all the time." And she said, "Son, don't ever do that." She said, "Because what I'm doing, I'm trying to make an image. And son, if you spend too much time polishing your image, you'll eventually tarnish your character and be an unhappy man. So you speak from your heart and speak the truth." Wow. And that set me off of, that's the way I tried to live my life. And
Coach, I will say you've done an incredible job. You know, we were talking before we came on here. Your legacy has just transcended generations of, you know, not only just people across the Southeast, but basketball people as well. Coach, a lot of people look up to you, and you know we're going to talk about more about your career, talk about LSU, but I do want to just start with this, Coach, and I want to ask you about your legacy. And you know, you're retired now, but you're still a pretty active face in college basketball and around the LSU community. Did you have any imagine when you started this that your legacy would be like it is today?
Mitch, I'm not trying to be humble or modest, but this is a valid thing I'm telling you. Never, when I got this head job, that was my first head college coaching job. I coached in junior high school and high school. I was an assistant at Utah State and Washington State. But when I came to LSU, everybody told me I'm making a mistake. They've had 14 out of 18 losing seasons. It's football country. You'll never win. So when I came here, I had two goals only. One, I wanted to turn LSU into a basketball power. Now that may have sounded delusional. Number two, I wanted to improve the lives of the young men I was coaching. Most of them were very similar to me. They grew up without fathers. They grew up poor. Never, not for 1 second, did I ever plan on being the National Coach of the Year, being in the College Basketball Hall of Fame, having a court named after me. That was never in my game plan. All of that was lagniappe. And I tried to follow through by the fact that I learned early in my career, coaching before I even got to LSU, I learned that players don't really care how much you know until they know how much you care. And once you do that, they talk about the X's and O's. John Wooden was very simple. He told me, I went out when I first got my job. I thought, I've got to meet with people that have got the greatest longevity. Well, in basketball, it was John Wooden. In the ministry, it was Norman Vincent Peale. In public speaking, it was Bob Richards. In music, it was Lawrence Welk. So I contacted all those people. Now, they didn't know me, and asked if I could come and spend some time with them. So they opened arms to me, and I went thinking I was just going to spend a day with John Wooden. I spent 4 days with him. Wow. He just, we'll talk some more. Come back tomorrow. And I remember when I was getting ready to leave, I thanked him and everything, and he said, Dale, here's the secret to being a great coach and being successful. Well, I didn't want to be rude. I'd already thrown my briefcase in the trunk. I didn't want to be rude and take, so I had to listen to this. He said, number one, if you want to be highly successful in college coaching, he said, you must have better players than anybody else. However, those better players must always put the team above themselves, or they will not be better players. And three, he said, don't try to be some coaching genius or guru. He said, every day you practice simplicity with constant repetition. And that's what I did. And thank God for him being a dear friend of mine for 45 years. If everybody could be like him, it'd be a pretty simple world. He had no vanity whatsoever. None. Zero.
Coach, you know, follow up on that, and I'm going to talk about John Wooden. This is incredible, it really is. I want to ask you, though, how did you get to LSU? Because, you know, no coaching experience to go to an SEC school and do as well as you did. How did you get to LSU?
I graduated from a small teacher's college in Minot, North Dakota, 500. I became a coach, and I loved high school. I loved coaching. However, what I didn't like, they would give you new subjects to teach. I remember one time the principal came and said, the chemistry teacher, she's pregnant, she can't. This is the day before school starts. She's not going to be able to teach. You're going to teach chemistry. I said, hold on, before you leave the room. I don't even know how to light a Bunsen burner. I said, I'm going to teach chemistry? So he said, well, you got to do it. So I was just staying ahead of the class. Like, I'd read the chapter and I'd run out. And if I didn't have any more to do in that particular class, I'd stall. I'd say, listen, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I take out your books. Tomorrow I'm going to give you a test on the next chapter. Well, I hadn't read the next chapter. And so John Wooden, what he said is so simple. Practice simplicity with constant repetition. And the reason I got out of high school coaching was due to the fact driver's education bored me. I mean, what am I going to do? What am I going to do there? And I wanted to be a coach and coach basketball. So when I wrote 100 letters, there's 300 Division I teams at that time. There were 100 letters to coaches, places I'd like to live. Only 2 people answered me. The coach at Michigan State, John Bennington, and the coach at Utah State, Liddell Anderson. And I told my wife, well, that's really rude. They could have at least said they don't have any positions. And then I got the job I got a call from Carl Maddox at LSU, and I came down here for the interview and stayed 25 years. So, in fact, when they'd say to me, who are your references? Who are my references? I said, is the janitor okay? I don't have any references. So thank God for Carl Maddox, the athletic director. He gave me a chance, and I'm deeply indebted to him.
Coach, I want to ask you about...
pathologically honest men I've ever met in my life, by the way.
Coach, staying on the course of your career, I want to ask you about John Wooden and the impact that he had. First talk about John Wooden as a man, because so many people in my era only hear the stories of John Wooden, but never got to know John Wooden as a person. What was he like as a man and as a mentor to you?
He had no vanity whatsoever. Kind, gentle. Edgar Guest described John Wooden and my mother perfectly when he said the following: I'd rather see a lesson than to hear one any day. I'd rather you walk with me than to merely show the way. The eye is a better teacher and more willing than mirror, and the counsel you are giving may be very fine and true, but I'd rather get my examples by observing what you do. He was just a good man, and never once was he braggadocious. Simple. He kept everything simple. If you'd go to his practice, it was like a high school practice. It was simple. It wasn't complicated. An outstanding man, and to say he has no vanity in this, it kind of reminds me of the first Webster dictionary ever printed was in 1806. And under the word success, it said fortunate, happy, kind, and prosperous. That was 1806. Now, John Wooden lived to almost 100. Now, in 2023, if you'll pick up the dictionary, under the word success, instead of saying fortunate, happy, kind, and prosperous, like it did in the first dictionary that came out, it now says success, attainment of wealth, fame, rank, and power. John Wooden didn't live with that. He lived with the 1806 philosophy of what success was.
Coach, staying on the topic of relationships and mentorships, I want to ask you about the relationship with Shaq. You guys met in an Army base there in Germany when you were doing a basketball camp. Talk about that relationship and how it still blossoms today.
It was almost like we were meant, for some reason, to have been together. It was so there was no connection. How did it happen in the mountains in Germany? Well, the State Department got a hold of me. The Berlin Wall was up, and the East Germans were threatening to invade West Germany, and etc. So the State Department was sending 80,000 troops to the East German border to intimidate them on the fact that, hey, we're staying here. We're not moving out of West Germany. I get a call from the State Department, and they want to know if I'll start in southern Germany and go all the way up to northern Germany, a place in the mountains called Wildflecken, which we had a cracked armor division, and historically, when Germany's invaded, they would come through this area of Wildflecken. So I've been on the road for about a week and kind of burning out all the traveling, anxious to get home. The last spot I go to, I finish my lecture, and I think, oh boy, I'm packing and getting in that airplane and heading back to Baton Rouge. I get a tap on the shoulder, and I turn around. There's a man I would estimate 6'9", maybe 200 pounds or more, but around 200 pounds. And he stuttered, Coach Brown. So then he proceeded. He said, I'll be trying out for the team. And he said, I run up and down the court about 3 or 4 times, and my lower extremity's tired. He said, and I can't dunk a ball, Coach. He said, is there any exercises you can show me so I can improve this area? I said, yes, I certainly can. I said, do you have a weight room in here? He said, no. And I said, well, what I'll do, soldier, I said, I'll show you some non-resistant exercises. And when I get back to Baton Rouge, I said, I'll send you our weight training program. I said, how long have you been in the service, soldier? He said, I'm not in the service. I said, you're not? Coach Brown, I'm only 13 years old. And I said, well, what's your name? He said, Shaquille O'Neal. I said, what are you doing here? He says, my father is a career military man. So being the Rhodes Scholar I am, I said, well, I'd like to meet your father. Is he around? He said, certainly. So I go to these in the sauna. I go to the sauna. Just as I'm going to go in the sauna, out comes this well-built, kind of heavy set at the time, but that's my father. That's my father. So I came up and I gave him my business card, and I said, if he ever develops into something, I will certainly be in contact with him. And he held the card, looking over the top of it, almost with disdain. He says, Coach Brown, this is all fine and good about basketball. But he said, I think it's time that we African Americans get educated. So our sons, he said, can be head coaches instead of assistants. And he said, if you're interested in my son's intellect, someday we might talk. Well, I thought, we've got really a good chance. So I got home. As soon as I got home, I didn't come home first. I went to the office. I sent that letter to him. Some weeks later, I get a letter from Shaquille. Dear Coach Brown, I did everything you told me to do. And my high school coach cut me off the team. He told me I'm too slow, too clumsy, I have too big a feet, I could never be a basketball player. What should I do? Man, I pondered it and I thought, what kind of a profound statement am I going to make to a 13-year-old child, thousands of miles across the ocean? I'm just going to tell him about my life. So I sat down and I don't have the letter in front of me, but I sat down handwritten. I said, Dear Shaquille, I'm so sorry what happened to you. However, in my life, similar things happened to me. I heard people say, Dale Brown ain't going to amount to be anything. You know, his mother's uneducated, he doesn't have a father. His father abandoned him. And I said, you cannot go by what other people say. The French have a word called idée fixée, which means whatever you will, not wish in your mind, it'll happen. So I said, if you do the following, I'm confident you'll be successful. If you always try to do your very best, and only you will know that, and never give up under any conditions, sooner or later, God will take care of everything else. Well, I put it in the mail, never dreaming he'd answer or he would answer. Well, he told me just a couple of years ago, I believe it was, we're chatting at lunch or what, and he said, you know, Coach, he said, my mom told me to go get the mail, and he said, it was an old country mailbox, so I'm heading down in snow, and he said, I'm thinking, you know, I'm just going to give up. I don't want to, I got cut. He said, I'm just going to give up basketball and go in the Army like my dad. And he said, I opened up that mailbox and read your letter on the way home, and I made up my mind that I'm not going to quit. Well, the guy that cut him, if you're interested in watching him coaching, he's coaching on the planet Jupiter now. He was spaced out. How would you do that to a 13-year-old? Then he came, and I put him in a speech class. And man, I put his schedule down. And he said, Coach, I can't take this speech class. I said, yep. Where are you transferring to? Transferring? Yeah, you said you can't take it. If you don't take it, you got to transfer. So he took that, and he had the highest grade point average on our team, and now he's got his doctorate degree. And I don't mean to make him out as, flawless. None of us are. But he is one of the most benevolent, simple guys. Everything's yes, sir, no, sir. He didn't have a posse with him. He loved little kids and poor people. Just a good human being.
Coach, follow up about Shaq, and I love this story, to be honest with you, but I want to ask you about one moment in particular in SEC basketball history, an SEC tournament game against Tennessee where they were, what they now call Hack-a-Shaq. Talk about that game. I think it was 93 or 92. Talk about that game and standing up for Shaq and your players during that SEC tournament quarterfinals against the Vols.
It has some history, and the history is fairly simple. There were 17 flagrant fouls, not fouls, flagrant, knowing he was an inferior free throw shooter, flagrant fouls. And I called the SEC time after time, and I said, I'm telling you, something's going to happen. I said, this guy's going to get sick of it. Shaquille probably hit somebody, then he's the bad guy, break somebody's nose, or he's going to get hurt. You've got to have those referees be more distinct, and flagrant fouls, they should kick them out of the game. So we're playing Tennessee at Tennessee. Now already at Tennessee, the particular individual that intentionally fouled him in this SEC tournament when we were 30 ahead had done the same thing in Knoxville. Coming down the floor, elbowed him right in the face, and still grabbed his nose, and I looked over and waved him off, don't go after him. So now, this goes in the SEC tournament, and the fight kind of breaks out. So I go out to try to break it up, and the kid's kind of swinging at me. And so then, of course, then the ridiculous thing, the next day, we played Kentucky. They suspended Shaquille and the player from Tennessee. And Shaquille didn't do anything but try to defend himself. So it was really an unfair deal, and I don't know how we get tolerated. I think, now, since you brought up that Shaquille thing, I made a lot of mistakes in coaching and in life, of course, but the biggest mistake I ever made, we used to chart the coaches, the managers, the trainers. We'd have his chart free throws, and we'd have on there the rim and the backboard on a piece of paper, and then they'd show if a guy swished it, if he hit the rim first, the backboard. And Shaquille's shooting percentage was about 40%. We were 4 or 5 weeks into practice. Well, the season's about ready to start. So it dawned on me, hey, I'm gonna get a hold of Rick Berry. So I called Rick Berry, the underhand shooter. He shot all his free throws underhand. So I went down and Shaquille was shooting. I said, Shaq, I said, you're going to leave a lot of points on the board. So I said, what I'm going to do, I'm going to get a hold of Rick Berry and have him come in here, have you learn how to shoot underhand. As I walked away, coach. So I said, please don't do that. Please don't. That's a granny shot. That's going to embarrass me. So I set a number that would be almost, I would say, as close to being unattainable, Mitch, as possible with him. I said, okay, if you shoot 70% in the last 2 weeks before we have a game, you won't have to do it. Lo and behold, he shot 75%. But I still made a mistake because he never was a good free throw shooter, and he did leave a lot of points. But live and learn.
Coach, I want to ask you about your two Final Fours in 1981, 1986. You really helped pave the way for what Kim Mulkey did this past season and win a national championship in basketball at LSU. Coach, first talk about your Final Fours, but also talk about what that national championship that Kim Mulkey had with her women's team meant to both you and the LSU basketball community.
Well, as I told you, everybody told me you're silly to go to LSU. It's a football school. They had not won the SEC title in 25 years, and they had some pretty good, Bob Pettit and Pete Maravich, but they hadn't won that in 25 years. They hadn't been to a Final Four, and the dream we had, in fact, 1981, we'd won 26 straight games. We were 17-0 in the SEC with one game left, and we lost at Kentucky. We won the conference. We had the most wins in the country, 31, and I'll be darned, in the SEC first round, our star player, Rudy Macklin, breaks his finger. So when we play Indiana in Philadelphia, we're without our best player. He was a superstar player for us, and we lost that game. Then in '86, you talk about we were an 11th seed, the lowest seed ever to advance to a Final Four. We lost our three centers, one an injury, one a suspension, and the other one? We had an injury, a suspension, and the other one was ineligible. So we had nobody left. So I called in Ricky Blanton, 6'5" kid from Florida that played for us, never played center in his life. And I told Ricky, I said, "We got no centers. You're going to have to wind up playing center." "Coach, I've never played with my back to the basket." I said, "Well, you're going to learn how. You're our center." And somehow that team beat the number 1, 2, and 3 seeds and made it to the Final Four, beat Kentucky in the regional championship that year, who had beaten us 3 times during the year. And so it's not easy for anybody to get to the Final Four. It's now, in retrospect, there were 2 other times we should have been there. We should have been to 4 Final Fours, and we did not make it the other 2 times. So we'll chalk that one up. I could have done a better job of coaching.
Coach, I want to ask you about, I've got a couple more questions for you, but obviously beating Kentucky. There has not been a coach in college basketball that has beaten Kentucky more in the SEC than you have. You beat them 18 times in your career. Coach, talk about playing Kentucky. Everybody knows about the history about Kentucky and who Kentucky is as a program. But, Coach, I want to ask you about beating Kentucky. And what does that say for programs, let's say, that are trying to, build, let's say, like an LSU when you were starting off and like a Chris Beard is doing at Ole Miss now. Coach, what does beating Kentucky signify in basketball now?
That's really an excellent question, Mitch. And let me tell you what I did. When I got to Baton Rouge, I got an SEC media guy because I knew this was football country, and I knew they had the greatest offensive player in the history of the game, Pistol Pete, and the leading scorer in the history, and they've had Bob Pettit, but they really never had done anything consistently. So I thought, well, who's the competition? Well, when I got the media guys, I thought, well, this can't be possible. Kentucky had won more SEC titles than the rest of the teams in the league combined. So I thought, well, when I have the first team meeting, I've got to be real brazen. I've got to give these guys confidence. So the hour before, I was in there on the chalkboard, and I wrote, "Our competition, main competition," and I wrote in big letters, Kentucky. And I said, "You're all going to wonder why I've got Kentucky up there." I said, "The reason I've got Kentucky up there, that's the best. They're the best in the country. They dominated LSU. LSU's beaten them one time at Lexington. They've beaten them one time in Baton Rouge, and all the rest. So forget about Auburn, forget about Vanderbilt, forget about Georgia. Well, I'm sure they thought, this guy from North Dakota's a lunatic. Forget about. So we go up there the first time and we win. We lose like about 25 points. We go up a second time, we lose by 28 points. We go up to the third time, we lose by 30. We go up to the fourth time. Now we haven't even gotten close to them. And I believe, if memory serves me right, I believe we lost by 34 points. So now my veterans are going to be done. They've heard me say this for 4 years, we're going to beat them. And we've been embarrassed for 4 years. So I thought, what am I going to do? They're going to think I'm some phony carpetbagger came in here and talked big and a phony evangelist. So I thought, I got to be bold. I got to be positive. I got to be how I feel about it. And so I almost kicked open the door. I said, don't shower. Sit down. I said, you seniors, I failed you. You've been up here now 4 years. You haven't won. I promise you, if you'll do this, I said, this isn't being delusional. If you stick with this system and believe in what we're doing, one day we'll come back to Lexington, Kentucky, and we'll beat them worse than they beat us. Okay, shower, let's get on the bus and head for the airport. Well, I knew that the kids read newspapers, so I'm sure they're going to say, well, did Coach just do this to us? Or is he going to do this to the media? So I went to the media room. I said basically the same thing. I remember the one writer called me delusional. He said Dale Brown's trying to be the white man's Muhammad Ali, making profound statements like that and whatever. So a couple of years later, we're playing in Rupp Arena, and we're 40 points ahead of them with a few minutes to go. And my assistant came up and said, Coach, we need to sub now. This game isn't over. Ron Abernathy was his name. He's from Kentucky originally. This game isn't over. I said, Coach, it's about as close to being over as I've ever seen a game. I said, you're right. So we put in 5 subs. Guess what? We won the game by 35 points, the worst defeat in the history of Rupp Arena. Wow. Why? Was there some pill, prayer, prescription, or magic wand? No. It's called positive thinking, and it's willing it. Now, we just had unusual kids, and then to think we would beat them 18 times, the most of any team, that was, I never ever would dream that, so.
Coach, to follow up with that, obviously a lot of been great memories between LSU and Kentucky in basketball. But, I got to bring this up, and, my dad has asked me to ask you about this because this was his first trip to Baton Rouge, was the Mardi Gras Miracle when Kentucky came back on you guys. What happened in that game, and what do you remember from that game?
Two things happened in that game. Number one, Kentucky had 7 guys, I believe, on that team. Correct me if I'm wrong. 7 guys that got drafted in the NBA, and they were 35 points behind. And Rick Pitino was the coach, and they went to strictly 3-point shots. And they were hottest. Now, they weren't hot the first half. That's why we got a 35-point lead. And we weren't a great team or anything. And so the mistake that was made, I probably should have slowed down and run the clock out. But I thought that would probably, we never did that. We ran. We fast broke. So I will take the mistake for that. I think I could have taken more time off the clock. And a tremendous comeback. The greatest comeback I've been involved in my life. So we had some strange games. I remember another time we're playing them in Baton Rouge. The series was really good, and that's why I'm against this only playing each other once.
Yeah.
You should play everybody in the SEC home and away. They've eliminated that, and it isn't as exciting. But I remember Kentucky was always kind of the beacon light for us. We're playing them, they're number 1 in the nation, and we foul out playing them in Baton Rouge. They're good. A lot of people think they're going to win the championship. We foul out our entire starting five. Our entire starting five. How is it going to be possible to foul out your entire starting five and beat a team ranked number one and going to probably have a good chance of winning the national championship? And so when I got up to, I'm pretty optimistic, and I got up and I really hadn't put it together. My assistant, Ron Abernathy, who's from Louisville, came over and he put his arm around me. He says, Coach, you're just going to have to pull one of the miracles. We can do it. And that made me feel good. So then I went down and told the team the same thing Ron said. And I'll be darned if we didn't win. So the series was really a good one. And Kentucky was our beacon light. And, I got to tell you a story on Sam Bowie, too, if I might. Sam Bowie, I loved Sam Bowie. Kenny Walker and him, I think, were my two favorite players, probably on Kentucky basketball history. And we're playing at Kentucky. We'd win 17 straight games. Now, if we win the last game at Kentucky, no one's ever won 18 straight games in the league. So we call timeout. We've got the last shot. And we go up on the baseline with Howard Carter. It worked perfectly. And Sam Bowie fouled him. And the ref was standing there. It wasn't Sam Bowie's man. He got away from his man. Sam Bowie came over to block the shot, but fouled him. So years later, Sam and I and Kenny Walker and one other Kentucky player, can't think of who it is right now, we were at a fundraiser in Kentucky, and I was sitting with Sam Bowie, and I said, Sam, when you blocked Howard Carter's shot, I said, did you foul him? And he had a big smile. He said, yep. He said, I fouled him twice. What do you mean you fouled him twice? He said, well, I went up to block the shot, and I hit him in the forehead, but my hand came down and hit him across the chest. And he said, you know why you lost, don't you? I said, obviously I know why we lost. The ref choked up, swallowed his whistle, and ran off the court. It was the last second he ran off the court. That's not why you won. He said, where did you play? Sam, is this a joke? Where did we play? What are you talking about? He said, where did we play? I said, where did we play? I said, we played in Rupp Arena. He said, well, that's why you lost, he said.
That's incredible, Coach. I want to ask you just to kind of follow up on this. Obviously, the game of the Southeastern Conference.
I told him wrong. I told you wrong. He said you didn't play in Rupp Arena. You played in Corrupt Arena. That's what he said and laughed.
Coach, the game of SEC basketball, and I've got two more questions I have for you, but the game of SEC basketball has really developed over the last 20 to 30 years, and it's really turned into a spectacle now where every team in the SEC has invested in their programs. And, Mississippi State's getting a brand new arena. They're, tearing down the hump and building it back up. And, of course, Ole Miss has got a brand new arena. Coach, talk about SEC basketball from the time that you took over to where it is now. And where do you see SEC basketball in 5, 10, 15, 20 years?
Well, it was no question it was football country. I mean, LSU was football. Georgia was football. Mississippi was football. Mississippi State was football. Auburn was football. Vanderbilt wasn't football. And their record would show that. But they just started to develop. Any team could beat any team on a given night. And it's at one time, I thought it was the strongest league in the country. But they just put emphasis on it, whereas before it was football country. The SEC was synonymous with football. Now, of course, I had heard of Pete Maravich in Kentucky, but I really didn't know anything much about SEC basketball. Now, the SEC made a major mistake. When they cut down playing twice a year teams and split them up like that, it took the fun out of the fact that Kentucky and LSU only play once a year.
Yeah.
We used to play twice. So I think that I think that weakened the league, to be honest with you.
Coach, I want to ask you the last question I have for you, and this is going to be kind of a fun question. This whole interview's been fun, but Coach, I've always just wanted to, as long as I've dreamed of interviewing you, I've wanted to ask you this question in particular. Coach, when you look back on your career, and obviously you've had a very good career, one, the first part of this has been, a favorite memory or two that you've had at LSU. But Coach, lastly, what does LSU and LSU basketball in particular mean to you personally and your family?
I coached from the time I first went out to coach. I coached in a little tiny town 2 miles from the Canadian border called Columbus. The town was 700. And I wanted to improve the lives and help young men be confident, because I didn't have a father figure. I had no contact. He just vanished. And so I wanted to really be, I loved coaching. I loved working with young people. And my goals were to try to improve their lives. Now, amazingly, when I got to college, the numbers of young men, time changes, that didn't have fathers was amazing. Not that I was trying to be Daddy Dale or something, like I got the nickname from some sports writer, Daddy Dale. But I wanted to see their lives improve. And as I said before, you don't have to be a Rhodes Scholar to figure this out. That players really don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And then the next thing, you set boundaries. Now, you don't want too many rules, but if you have a rule that if they flunk their drug test, they're done, that's it. Well, I've known of situations where guys get 5, 6 chances before they get suspended. So just to improve the lives. And then I think that's been pretty well done. I had 160 players at LSU in 25 years. Of those 160 players, 75% of them have a college degree. Now, normally colleges, the normal student body is about 50 to 53%. And a lot of them came back later and finished up. And I was on, Stanley Roberts was an example. He went and played pro ball and left school. And I was on him to get a degree because his mother told me that, will you really help him work on him getting a degree? They lived in a small little trailer and were poor. And I said, I'll do all in my power. So when Stanley finished up in the NBA and came back to Baton Rouge for work, I kept on calling him, and I said, Stanley, do you know who Methuselah is? No. I said, he's a man in the Bible that lived to be 969. I'm going to replace him. I'm going to live to be 970. And that whole time, I'm going to be on your back till you agree to come back to college and finish your degree. I give up, I'll come back, and he did it. So they left here beyond just basketball, I think. That's a pretty good percentile. And anyway, you had interesting questions. I wasn't bored 1 second.
Coach, I really appreciate you taking this time. This has just been an honor. I mean, I really, truthfully, I wish I had even better words. This has just been so awesome, Coach. I really appreciate you and taking the time.
North Dakota farm boy got lucky, and thanks to Carl Maddox, when I came here to interview, they didn't have those, they taped those companies to search out players. They just did it. In fact, they got my name, the athletic director, through Joe Dean, who was String Music, the guy that did basketball for the SEC, and was the president of Converse for a while. When I came here, I remember and got interviewed. There were 3 men, a banker, an oil man, and a professor at LSU were on the committee. And in the meeting, the one guy said to me, Dale Brown, he said, why should we recruit you? Why should we give you the job? He said, why are you any different than anybody else? I said, well, I'm not sure you should give me the job. And I saw they looked bewildered, and he said, well, why? I said, well, no one's asked my philosophy, So let me tell you what my philosophy is. Number one, I'm going to try to do it as honorably as I can with dignity. Number two, if you give me this job, you may have an all-white team, you may have an all-black team, you may have an all-foreign team, you may have a combination of all of them. So anyway, the interview ended. I was going to the state tournament in Louisiana, even though the job, I was just here for an interview, but Louisiana had some pretty good players, so I was going to the state tournament, and my wife told me, call me after the interview. There weren't cell phones at the time, so I'm halfway up to this small town that the tournament's going to be in, and I forgot to call my wife, but I see a sign that said, Bunkie, Louisiana, 5 miles. So I stopped there, go in the drugstore, ask if I can use the phone. So they have a pay phone. I remember it was a nickel. And I call my wife and I tell her how the interview went. And she said, Dale. A Japanese kamikaze pilot has more of a chance getting that job than you. You'll never get that job for what you said. Well, I won't get it. A week later, they told me to bring my wife. And thanks to Carl Maddox, who was an honorable, good man, stayed 25 years.
Wow. You have been listening to the Mitch Davis Show. Very special thank you to head coach Dale Brown for coming on, talking about his career. What a wonderful man that Coach Brown is. Really, truly a great man. Thank you so much for listening to the Mitch Davis Show. I'm your host, Mitch Davis, founder of the MitchDavisShow.com. Make sure you're checking out the website, themitchdavisshow.com. Also on Twitter, MitchDavis_8. And lastly, I want to give a big thank you to the Cotton States Baseball League for their sponsorship of the Mitch Davis Show, one of the most premier, the best collegiate baseball leagues, summer baseball leagues in the country. Truly the best. Look forward to being out at B&A Park there in New Albany, Mississippi over the summer. Should be a really fun summer of great baseball. Again, thank you so much for listening to the Mitch Davis Show.